Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to YWCA of Greater Atlanta's Salute to Women of Achievement 2021.
Welcome and thank you for being here for Salute to Women of Achievement Reimagined. Today we will honor our Woman of Achievement, Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice, President and Dean of the Morehouse School of Medicine and a trailblazer in her field. And then you'll go into salons with some of the most esteemed women in Atlanta to talk up close and personal about topics that are central to the work of the YWCA and critical tools to help women and girls in Atlanta thrive. You should have received a link to your assigned salon. If not, please email info@ywcaatlanta.org. I want to thank our sponsors, especially our corporate sponsors, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Cox Enterprises, and UPS, and our distinguished sponsors, the Arthur M. Blank Foundation and Georgia Power, and thanks to all of our hosts. If anything, this pandemic illustrates to us every day the inequities in our society. Our vision is to be the leading voice for advocacy and support while deconstructing the structural barriers of discrimination. There is no better organization than the YWCA to lead these efforts to tackle the injustices in healthcare, education, economics, and race. We get there by empowering women to reach their potential and by teaching girls how to succeed in non-traditional professions and in life skills. YWCA appreciates your support, especially now. But please consider giving more. Just click the donate button on your screen. We need your help. Please join me in welcoming Sharman Goins, the CEO of YWCA of Greater Atlanta, to tell you more.
Barry, thank you for your leadership and support. So those of you who know me know I like to put a positive spin on everything. But I have to admit, like so many of you, we echo the words of Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm just sick and tired of being sick and tired. Mass shootings, domestic terrorism, attacks against Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, the killing of Black men and boys and women, and an attempted return to Jim Crow voting laws right here, all of this weigh heavy on us. Acts of justice of all kinds and compassion are desperately needed right now, which is why the mission of YWCA to eliminate racism and empower women and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all is critical every single day. Through programs like our Early Learning Academy and many others, we are supporting women and raising the next generation to be strong, active, kind, and outspoken about injustice everywhere. Let me give you a real-life example. Running a preschool is an act of economic justice, especially in a pandemic. In January 2020, women outnumbered men in the workforce. But by December, women accounted for nearly 90% of the jobs lost. At YWCA, the vast majority of our workforce is female. We wanted to do all we could to keep them employed while supporting other women who work by providing a safe and caring environment for their children. And we teach children life skills that include acts of kindness, compassion, and inclusive environment. Why? Well, the old saying that says, when you educate a girl, you change the community. Well, when you help a woman, you help the world. That is exactly what we do here at YWCA of Greater Atlanta for women like our next two guests and their children. Take a listen.
When I was pregnant with my first child, I knew I'd be going back to work, so finding nurturing and safe childcare was a big priority. I was a consultant staffed at the CDC then, and I scoured the listserv for childcare recommendations. The YWCA of Greater Atlanta kept popping up, and I reached out in the hopes that their infant room would have space for our son. As I did further research on the YW, I was not only impressed that the ELA is quality rated, I was also deeply moved by the mission. This wasn't about just providing great care, which I knew they would. Our personal values aligned with those of the YW, and we knew this was the place we wanted our son to be. There was diversity among the kids and staff, a clear vision of kindness and consideration, and the overall mission of the YW permeates everything in positive ways, even in the infant room. Our first son, Grant, went to the YW through pre-K and then kept going back for aftercare. And his little brother, Rhett, is now finishing up pre-K with Miss Vieira and Miss Janet. Choosing childcare for our first was tough. I had all the mom guilt and tears dropping him off that first day and weeks. We've now been part of the YW family since 2014, and we know we made the absolute right decision for our sons, our family, and the community.
I loved caring for Grant and now Rhett and being a part of Lauren's family. I am so proud to be a member of the YWCA family too. In fact, my history with the YWCA goes back over 20 years when my grandmother adopted 3 of my siblings and me. My youngest brother was a pre-K age, and someone recommended that my grandmother look into the YWCA, and that's when it all began. Then when I became a mother, my grandmother reminded me of the YWCA, and I knew that I would not look any further. All of my babies went to the YWCA. I enjoyed being a parent volunteer, and one day they asked me if I'd like a job there. I love transitioning to be a professional in childcare. In fact, Ms. Sharman encouraged me to take a break and to get a degree in childcare, which I did. The pandemic has certainly affected us all, but let me tell you, childcare workers have not missed a beat, and the YWCA supported us so that we could care for the children. Early childhood education doesn't get as much credit as it is due. Without us, parents can't work and provide for their families. Without this work, we can't either. In order for the world to turn and business to happen, someone has to take care of the children. We are essential workers and always have been. The Early Learning Academy provides great care and walks the walk of the mission of the YWCA. Like Lauren said, it's wonderful when good, safe, nurturing care aligns with your core values. It's an honor to be a part of the family, and we are grateful for your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren and Vieira. You are the why of the YW, and we are so grateful to have you in the family. And for all of you out there, we invite you to join us by making a pledge to support our programs. As you know, you can just click on that button on your screen. Now, let's go to Morehouse School of Medicine and salute an amazing woman. The pandemic has further exposed cracks in our system, especially inequities in healthcare. Communities of color are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, further highlighting these inequities. A pioneer in exposing health disparities is our Woman of Achievement for 2021. In fact, Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice has been on the front lines calling attention to health disparities before frontlines was even coined a phrase. The 6th president of Morehouse School of Medicine and the first woman to lead a freestanding medical institution, Dr. Montgomery Rice serves as both the president and dean. Dr. Montgomery Rice is dedicated to the creation and the advancement of health equity while lending her vast experience and talents to programs that enhance pipeline opportunities for academically diverse learners. She is on a mission to diversify the physician and scientific workforce, which will foster equity in healthcare access and health outcomes. These attributes and more make her the right and clear choice as YWCA of Greater Atlanta's 2021 Woman of Achievement. Dr. Rice? Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am definitely surprised. Thank you so much. And I would like to start my remarks by thanking the YWCA of Greater Atlanta for giving me this honor, the 2021 Woman of Achievement. I've had the opportunity to actually be involved with the YWCA for many, many years, having received an award in Atlanta and in Nashville. And yet I am still so humbled and honored to be among the women who have been chosen for these prestigious awards. Throughout my career and my personal journey, which began as an engineering student at Georgia Tech, who decided that medicine would be my path, I went on to medical school, Harvard Medical School, Meharry Medical College, where I was fortunate enough to found the Center for Women's Health Research, which was a center that was dedicated to studying diseases that disproportionately impacted women of color. That is my first connection to the YWCA. The empowerment that women were given during that time through our partnerships of whether or not we were identifying places for them to receive care or addressing some of the abusive issues that they were contending with in their families, or whether they were just trying to better their education, really led me to where I am today at Morehouse School of Medicine, where I am fortunate enough to serve as the president and dean. The issues that I saw in women then are issues that we still continue to see today. And the pandemic has really just snatched the curtain down on how prevalent those issues are in our country and how important it is that we have the relationships and the partnerships that we have with organizations like the YWCA. What we've seen with this pandemic is that Black and Brown and Indigenous populations have taken the brunt of the disease. And it's not because of race or ethnicity, it is really because of the social determinants and the socioeconomic devastations that they experience every day. And unfortunately, women continue to be the brunt of those disparities. And although we've seen challenges with this pandemic, guess what we've also seen? We've seen people step up. We've seen people come together as a community and understand that this is a public health crisis and that we, the public, can make a positive difference in the face of what seems to be insurmountable challenges. We've seen a vaccine come to fruition to serve as another important thing in our toolkit, along with washing our hands, wearing our mask, and watching our distances to make a difference. What I am proud to is to be a part of a community that cares and a community that is willing to put women first, that is willing to acknowledge the challenges that women and girls have, but also to create solutions that allow them to be empowered to make changes in their lives that we know will impact their families. So to the YWCA of Greater Atlanta, I say thank you. I look forward to the work that we will continue to do together, individually and collectively, through our organizations and through our persons. Thank you very much.
It is my distinct pleasure to also introduce Candace Presley, Director of Community and Public Affairs at WSB-TV and a member of YWCA's 2020 Academy of Women Achievers. She will lead a conversation with Dr. Montgomery Rice. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome them both.
Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice, congratulations on this auspicious award from the YWCA of Greater Atlanta. What type of barriers or challenges did you experience as a Black female student pursuing a career originally in engineering, which then was going to turn to medicine?
You know, the biggest challenge that I felt when I went to Georgia Tech was isolation. Because as you can imagine, in the 1970s, late 79, 80s, there were not a lot of women in chemical engineering. And there were clearly not a lot of Black women in chemical engineering. And so whereas in the classroom, we had large classrooms, particularly for our early classes. And then as you got further along in your career or in the school, as you advanced, the classes got smaller. And so you would see people, men, coming together, studying together, passing information to each other to prepare for exams. And I didn't feel a lot of that. I felt sort of left out. As I continued to advance in my career in medicine, going to Harvard Medical School, in my class, there were only 10 people of color. And so it wasn't so much that what I felt as a woman, it was what I felt as a Black woman, being in a new environment in Boston, and again, feeling isolated. And so that's probably been the biggest challenge of how do you integrate yourself into a circle where no one has invited you to come.
A great piece of advice that you could give to women watching this interview right now, because sadly, in 2021, that isolation is still being experienced by many women. What do you tell them on how to deal with it?
So first thing I would tell a woman is don't assume that people actually don't want you in the circle. Sometimes people just don't know how to make the invitation. And so you also have to present yourself as being open to the invitation. And then sometimes you just have to try to break the glass. And then when you get in, be yourself. Because if you're going to be in your circle, in the circle, and you're going to be successful in the circle, you really need to bring your full self to the circle.
As you know, the mission of the YWCA of Greater Atlanta is to eliminate racism. And as we are having this conversation, it leads to questions about health inequalities and healthcare disparities. As a person of color, you are in a key position to address these inequities. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I have probably spent my entire career not intentionally in the beginning, but then it transitioned to that, to being an advocate for women's health. And then that has led to being an advocate for eliminating health disparities that anybody experiences, but really clearly focused on people of color. My initial desire when I started medical school, I was going to be a neurosurgeon. I loved the technical aspect of it. I did OBGYN as my last rotation. And then I fell in love with women being empowered, that women did have the power to change the destiny and the outcome of their pregnancy. And I fell in love with reproductive endocrinology and fertility because it was a deficit that you turned into a positive. So someone was trying to get pregnant, and there were things that you could do, interventions that you could participate in that could lead to that outcome. As I got further along in my career, though, I started to understand the disparities in women's health, particularly with Black women, that Black women had a higher rate of infertility secondary to having fibroid disease or having endocrine disorders, and that they had a decrease in their access to comparable therapies that could correct their problems, and a decrease in access to specialists who could address their problems. And I also then started to see that Black women, based on race, also had differences in outcomes. That Black women tended to have more hysterectomies than other women, secondary to common problems. And so that sort of forced me to look behind the curtain and say, what were the reasons for this? Which gets to sort of my first introduction to the Y, because in my Women's Center at Meharry, we partner with the Y to deal with some of the challenges that women were having in childcare or job inequality, and also with some of their challenges that they were having with being in abusive relationships. And so I started to see how social determinants influences health outcomes, particularly for women of color.
Is that when you began to see those opportunities to affect positive change when it comes to healthcare for women, especially women of color?
Particularly so, yes. So if you think about what the Y does, right? What they really do is they empower women to sort of take the resources that are available to them, but to sort of self-correct. How do they look at where their gaps are and improve their education or improve their job outcomes or influence positively with their family members, et cetera. And it's about giving them opportunity and chance. And so one of the things I figured out early on, if we were going to solve these complex problems around health inequities, we had to deal with social determinants, and that it was going to take a team, having community-based organizations, having groups like the Y, having healthcare facilities, all to partner together to understand that it was a multifaceted reason for the challenges that women were having. But together we could solve those problems.
Can you talk to us about the adverse impact that racism has, especially on people of color?
Yes. When I think about this adverse impact that it has, the first word that comes to mind for me is stress. The stress that it brings forward. And I will give you my example. When I first had my first job at a historically Black college or university, it was Meharry Medical College. My entire education and training, and my first 8 years was at a majority institution. And when I came to Meharry, and I was the chair of OBGYN, and about 80% of the people there are people of color, my husband said to me one day, "You seem to be less stressed." And I said, "Really?" And what I recognize is it's different when you can go to work every day and race is not an issue. I didn't have to make assumptions about whether or not I was going to be included or excluded. I didn't have to make an assumption if someone was making a decision about something that I said or disagreeing with me because of my race. And that really did decrease my stress. It allowed me to be more creative. I don't think anybody would ever say I had a problem speaking my mind, but I'd say speaking my mind without consequences of people assuming that I was saying something and that it was racially motivated. And so it was freeing. It really was.
For leaders who don't or did not have that luxury, what can be done to change the system?
We have to have more diverse persons at the table. And as a leader, it is your responsibility to help create that environment of inclusion. So it's not just enough to have a lot of diverse people at the table by race and ethnicity. You really want diverse people at the table based on life experiences, right? Because that's what leads to cognitive diversity. That's how you solve for real complex problems that impact real people. So you want race, gender, ethnicity, orientation, but you also want people who've had different experiences. And then you want to ensure that that table has a level of openness that people can speak without fear and actually be heard. And that at some point when the solution comes to fruition, that a person sees themselves in that solution. Can't be the whole solution. It's best if it's a part of the solution.
In what ways might other women in leadership positions like you speak up and speak out about the concerns many people of color have about the disparities in our healthcare system today?
First of all, I would ask women to model behaviors that allow them to demonstrate that they're concerned. And what do I mean by that? I'm not talking about everybody being a size 6 or controlling their blood pressure 100%. But first of all, demonstrating that you are aware of the disparities, and then doing what you can do within your sphere of influence to make a difference, which first begins with yourself, right? Exercising, eating healthy, talking about the challenges and being aware of the challenges that others may have who cannot do that. Because that's where that first recognition of disparities occurs. So as a physician, I ask a simple question when I was fully practicing, no matter what the issue was, based on who's sitting in front of me, what's possible. In order for me to answer that question, I got to ask you some questions. I got to ask you some questions. I got to focus on you. I got to say, can she really get this prescription filled? Does she really live in an environment, in a neighborhood that allows her to be safe walking 30 minutes a day? Can she afford a gym membership if that's what I'm focusing on? Who's there to support her if I offer this surgical procedure and she needs to be off work for 2 or 3 weeks? Will her job allow for that? So if I could have the answers to those questions when I'm prescribing what I think is this best next action for you, then I get to help you answer that question. What's best for you and what's possible for you? And so it is acknowledging that differences exist for people based on not just their genetic makeup, but based on their social circumstances. And that we as persons of influence, being physicians, being caregivers, being leaders, have the potential to make a difference, influencing that outcome for that individual.
Asking those questions and getting those answers from patients may illustrate to you as the physician a lack of access to health care, which then can lead to other issues in the family. Can you speak a little bit to how those challenges might be addressed?
Big challenges. And this is where, to me, when we think about the social determinants of health, this is where we see the biggest opportunities and the biggest challenges. And I use those words in that order for a reason. I do not believe that there's any challenge that a person cannot overcome with the right amount of resources and support. And so when we look at, if I may bring into something that's really relevant right now, this COVID-19 pandemic, before we could start talking to people about taking the vaccine, we had to first talk to them about being in the vaccine trial. But before we could talk about being in a vaccine trial, we had to acknowledge the mistrust and distrust that Black and Latinx persons have, people of color have, with the health system. We had to acknowledge it. We had to own it. We couldn't be dismissive of it. So we had to educate, listen first, then educate based on where people were, meeting people where they were. And we had to do a lot of listening. We had to do a lot of surveys because people's hesitancy was based on different perspectives. Some of those perspectives were an experience that they had with the health system, but some of those, that hesitancy was based on an experience that they saw in their parents or their neighbor, et cetera, or something they read about. And many of us tried to address all of that. We then, though, had to then say, how do you transition that conversation to, I want you to be a part of a vaccine trial that people have termed warp speed. Now, if you're gonna ever try to do something in medicine and try to get somebody to take a medication, you don't ever wanna name the research trial warp speed. And so then we had to dispel the myths around warp speed, and that scientific rigor had gone into the development of the vaccine. And then all the while, we were acknowledging the disproportionate burden of Black and Latinx people with this virus. Once the vaccine became available, we then had to address access. So my husband, who's an engineer, who's a real engineer, who said to me early on, okay, first of all, you got a supply problem, okay? You don't have enough vaccine, and he's a manufacturing engineer, and he's like, you need to use all the power to get more vaccines developed. And then you got to really address equitable access and distribution. Distribution to those areas and to those communities that are disproportionately impacted. And then access, you all. Not just because a vaccine is there on the shelf doesn't mean it's gonna go into the person's arm. And so then once again, we had to deal with all the social determinants, right? That had impacted people having access to the vaccine and it transitioning into their arm. And so that whole schema for me is how I think about how we address problems and create sustainable solutions.
That having been said, are you optimistic that we are on the road to community immunity so that we are getting closer to what our next normal is going to be in society?
I love that you said community immunity and versus herd immunity, okay? Because behind every vaccination has been a person, right? And it is about the community. We are way better than where we were in December when I got my vaccine. So we now have ready, ongoing manufacturing and production. We still have 2 great vaccines that are available, right? Without question, that are safe and effective. And we have begun to, I think, finally recognize that while the criteria we needed to set up initially for how we would prioritize, that once we got enough manufacturing, we could move beyond that. And I appreciate the leadership in the White House for acknowledging that we needed to move faster. So now I think about 51% of persons, adults, have received at least their first vaccine. I think we are on our way. But, and I don't use the word but a lot, I usually use and, but I'm saying but now. We must continue to be vigilant in wearing our mask, washing our hands, and watching our distance. And the reason for that is that just because you've taken a vaccine, it doesn't mean that you cannot spread the disease. You can still spread the virus. And we want to be able to prevent that. And that if you get the virus, that you're gonna already have something on board, like that vaccine, that will do the 2 things that we said the vaccine were gonna do first. And that was decrease deaths and decrease hospitalizations. Now, we are gonna see it also decrease cases once we get enough people vaccinated.
Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice, again, congratulations on this auspicious award presented to you by the YWCA of Greater Atlanta. And I think by this conversation, everyone knows why she is our honoree this year, leaving us with some very critical guidance as we move forward in the days ahead. Dr. Rice, thank you again.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sarah Irvin, founder and chair of Metrics Marketing and chair of the board of directors of YWCA of Greater Atlanta.
Thank you both. I hope everyone's been inspired by the work we do. There is no more lofty mission than ours. Eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. There is so much more work we could do with your support. Please consider making a donation. The donate button is on the right of your screen. Now it's time to go to your assigned salon. I want to thank all of our esteemed Academy members who gave up their time to welcome you into their salons. If you haven't received your link, please email info, I-N-F-O, at ywcaatlanta.org, and it will be sent to you. Thank you so much for being with us.